Variables and data types in PLSQL. As I said, a variable is essentially a generic bucket for putting values into. The notation inside a PLSQL procedure, as you can see there, is very obviously val : equals when you instantiate it. When you're actually just pushing the variable into the code without applying a value or putting a value into it, you don't need to use the colon, as you can see below in the if statement. So here's the, in fact that's a semicolon, and then the val statement, well, the if statement with the val inside there. You don't need the semicolon there. You can see that the val variables highlighted, the numerator and denominator variables are highlighted within all of this code here. The variable parameters referred to by their names, no extra notation, simple as that. Scope. Here's a block. You declare these variables in this block, they are applied in here. When you come out of this block, they no longer exist. Same applies down here, in a block 1, in a block 2. Outside of this block, these variables apply to this entire block until you go into there. So if you had var1 from up here in between these two procedures, they would apply to the begin and end from the top and the bottom, but they wouldn't apply within these sub-procedures. What happens when the execution in a program goes inside this procedure, it takes the state, in other words the variables, and puts it on a stack. It goes into here, it creates these variables regardless of whether they're the same name or not, does its stuff, comes out, forgets these things, does what it has to do, brings back what it has to bring back, takes these values, puts them back off the stack, back into memory, uses them till it gets to here, does the same process again. That's how scope works in any programming language. Data types in PLSQL, there's quite a few of them in Oracle. There's a special thing in PLSQL called a Boolean, which simply returns a true or false. So you can say if true, if false. There are some special operators. I like to call them operators. What they do is they allow you to pull the type of a data type when you don't necessarily know what it is from a table, or a row type, the entire row. So as you can see down here, I'm creating a data type here where the variable is called category, but its data type is actually from the table and the name column. This one here is actually an entire row type, categories, lots of them, from the entire row of the category table. That's quite convenient because you don't have to declare everything all over the place. A type is actually a user-defined type where you can build things to create structures such as rows for records and so on and so forth. A record actually allows you to create an iteration or a duplication of a type, including things like column types, such as you can create a record structure that doesn't necessarily exist in a table, or if you don't want to use these options. It's versatile, but that versatility also makes for complexity. This piece of code here declares a record as a copy of the ACT table structure, because we're saying we're using ACT%row type. This piece of code here is creating a new type structure that doesn't exist anymore. It's actually taking venue and the name of the ACT, or the name of the venue and the name of the ACT, and then the show ID, and putting it into an internal record. Doesn't exist in the database, and it's creating a cursor out of it. Interesting, yes? There's the cursor creation against the variable. Objects and object data types. You can create dynamic arrays. A dynamic array is an array that doesn't have a specified number of rows. It's called a nested table in PLSQL. A fixed length array that is basically an array with a fixed number of entries is called a V-array. These are certain types of array structures that are used in all programming languages, and you may have heard of them before if you know anything about programming. Essentially, they're fixed length and dynamic arrays, as I already said. They are used in many programming languages. An associative array is special to PLSQL in that it has an index in it. There is a lot of object capability in PLSQL, but it's far too complicated for a course like this. This course is focusing on SQL, some PLSQL, and also some facets of database administration being intermediate. To cover all the object programming attributes of PLSQL, it would need an entire course. But basically, you have collection elements, which allows you to create object structures and hierarchies. You can create classes and methods in PLSQL. And there's also the more traditional object relational data types of LOBs. That's a large binary object. Basically, binary objects were created to initially store things like multimedia objects such as sound files and images, but then at a later stage you started getting things like XML data put into LOBs, which obviously, as far as Oracle is concerned, that binary object is just an undecipherable piece of stuff stored in a binary chunk of data. As far as XML is concerned, there is interpretive capability within the XML itself, but the initial object relational database structures essentially stored things as a binary chunk that you couldn't do anything with programmatically. Nowadays it's different. XML is handled in Oracle actually, and quite extensively. It's not necessarily that efficient, but it is quite comprehensive and is quite useful. As far as the object aspects with collections and classes and methods of PLSQL, we don't really want to go into that in a course like this because we'll be here for 100 years. This topic will be continued with example coding in the next movie.